Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
Morning, Skura.
Morning.
Morning.
Good morning, Andrew.
Morning all.
Frank.
Morning, all.
Morning, Frank.
Morning.
Hi, Frank.
How's it, Tony?
Yeah.
Morning, everyone. Morning.
Morning.
Hi there, Alan.
Morning, Wally.
Hi, Skura. Greetings. Load shedding in Cape Town, as you can see,
Yeah, it's back, eh?
since 4 o'clock. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I thought they'd sorted out all the load shedding. You're down about 4 or 5 steps from us.
Yeah, somewhat better, but it's again 4 hours now from 4 o'clock this morning. We're expecting it back at 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
It's blooming awful.
Morning, everyone. Well, we will start straight away with a bit of a delay in starting. Today we have Nathan Iyer talking through his journey in planning and design. So Nathan has been involved in the development field for over 25 years. He has led several large-scale projects, including the Point Waterfront, Bridge City Town Center, Mosmabida Urban Design, Conubia Development, KZN Eurotropolis. He's also a lead designer in Mauritius for 3 smart cities. That's amongst a lot of other things that he has been involved in. Nathan, over to you, sir. Just take us through your journey in your career. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for joining me. I think firstly, thanks to SAIA KZN for giving us this opportunity to share our work and our thoughts over the last few years. And I must say, during this time, the build up to this kind of over the last 3 weeks, you spend a lot of time reflecting on your work and decisions you've made and why you've looked at the world through a particular lens. So I've done quite a lot of introspection and almost want to go back to where it all started. And I think the environment that I've sort of grown up in and the sort of lived experience, apart from the learned experience, I think is probably more important in shaping one's way of thinking as a designer. So with your indulgence, I'll start with a little bit of background and where I come from. So that's probably part of the introduction that I wanted to share with you. So I'm just going to open the actual presentation, and I hope it's all good, clear on your side. Kiara, can you just confirm that that's okay?
Yes, it's fine, Nathan.
Perfect. I'm just going to close this other dialog box. All right, so I've titled the presentation "My World in 10 Minutes," and it's quite interesting. A lot of people have asked me, Nathan, are you really going to talk for 10 minutes? I think almost implying that I talk a lot. So I'll definitely try and keep within the limit that I've been given, which is about an hour, and also allow for some discussion. So it will be, unfortunately, more than 10 minutes, and I'll explain what that means very shortly, what that title actually refers to. So the structure of the presentation is an introduction. I'll then talk to our practice, just giving a sort of background and also how we approach our work, what we do, and how we think. I'll then illustrate our approach through several projects, sort of featured projects. And these will be presented according to scale. So I'll start with the sort of city scale, then moving down to the precinct scale, place, building, and we cover probably about, say, about 20 projects. And I'll try and go through them as quickly as possible. Hopefully the imagery speaks for themselves and wouldn't have to talk to every slide. And then thought it would be interesting to talk about our design process and approach, and to illustrate this through one of our current projects, which is more at a conceptual stage, just to indicate the kind of the steps that we take, our journey in each project, and the kind of thinking that we approach projects through. And then lastly, I'll conclude with where to from here, some thoughts on future cities as a conclusion. So that's the overall structure. So why the title, My World in 10 Minutes? And this is really the background to this title. So the red dot is where I had grown up, where I was born. This is Carlisle Street in central Durban. And within this area, I think most of you, hopefully some of you would know the area. It was quite a vibrant place to grow up in, completely mixed use type of environment. And the first circle that you see is a 5-minute walk from my home. And the second circle is a 10-minute walk. And just to take you sort of further back, this would have been my paternal family home. This is where my father lived prior to moving to this apartment, this flat really in Carlisle Street. And to describe the flat, because I think it is of relevance here, it was a 4-story building with an inner circulation and courtyard, which became the kind of social space for all of us growing up. And we would celebrate religious festivals and so on within the space. And so the typology with sort of meets the street, a commercial edge at the bottom, is something that, almost intuitively I kind of respond to in most projects. So as a typology, I think that was quite interesting architecturally. So coming back to the activity, so this was my paternal home. My maternal side of the family came from Warwick Avenue, also within a 10-minute walk. This is the St. Aidan's Hospital. This is where I was born. This is St. Aidan's Church, where I was baptized and confirmed. And I'm still active, well, not active when I do go. This is the church that I do go to. For recreation, this was the Greyville Racecourse. We used to have our soccer practice here. Curry's Fountain. On weekends, we used to go and watch soccer matches. What's shown in F would be family or family members that lived within this sort of walking distance. So we actually didn't have a car. We didn't need a car. And only much later, my father get a car. And that was really just to visit family outside of the city. The market, obviously a place that, we would do shopping. And then along what was called Grey Street is where we would do our shopping. And I recall fond memories of walking down Grey Street and to the market. And it was a circuit that I would take with my mom. There was the ability to access your daily needs on foot, I think is really the message that I'm going through here. There was the tailor, the barber, and I'm pretty sure if I look around, I would come up with the candlestick maker as well. So a completely integrated space to grow up in. Just some other sort of further background, at that time and prior to this, in fact, there was a very rich urban history within this, what is referred to as the cash bar. This is an image of my parents, my mum and dad, who were South African ballroom champions, and as it appeared in Drum magazine, probably the late 50s. And I think what the sort of message and what I get out of this is, when we were growing up, we grew up in quite a diverse home. We had, my father's friends were these ballroom dancers, quite statuesque men, proud men from Umlazi, from KwaMashu, from Greenwood Park, and all within the same social circle. And I think of significance, really the point I want to drive is that apartheid and the imposition of the apartheid city was a deliberate strategy to break that, the formation of a social compact across different cultural groups, and by separating people. And I think that for me has been part of one of the greatest influences in the way, in the lens in which I look at our work. So Durban's apartheid spatial legacy, I think, is something that we still have to deal with. So as an example, in the early 80s, this community of Warwick Avenue, the buildings were demolished. My granny's flat was demolished. and the buildings alongside, and again, the same 4-story typology, to make way for Technicon Natal, as it was called, sports fields. So imagine uprooting an entire community to make space for sports fields. And this was undertaken by the Durban City Council at that time. Those of you who would know Scala as quite a historic building, that building remained, but its functions had changed. It became student housing. And so I witnessed this, this movement of people, of a whole community, to places like Newlands, Wentworth, Phoenix, and so on. And, you know, in many ways, I think Warwick Avenue is more than the market, which everyone seems to romanticize about. It's actually a kind of version of our District 6 and the relocation of people in the grand plan of apartheid. And I think there's a need to uncover more of that history. So if you look at Durban's apartheid spatial structure, what's shown in red would be the township areas outside of the Western Corridor and the Coastal Corridor, which are resource rich in terms of opportunities. One of the devices that was used is the agricultural zone along the Northern Corridor of Durban, which was deliberately used as a means to separate Phoenix from Umhlanga, KwaMashu from Phoenix, as a spatial device to separate communities. And if you look at the pattern of settlement in Johannesburg in forging the apartheid city, again, using so-called natural or agricultural buffers to separate communities. You have the east-west mining belt that separates the wealthy and opportunities that live in the north and the communities within the south, such as Soweto. If you look at Orange Farm, it's a community we currently work in, so far dislocated from having opportunity, you know, which begs the question, how do we redress this sort of dysfunctional city, and how do you deal with communities like Orange Farm, where people are well rooted and there is a sense of community? How do we provide for facilities, economic opportunities that makes it more of a livable place, that completes the environment? I think becomes an important aspect that we need to look at. So why would I talk about all of that at the beginning? I think it's really about understanding the practice in terms of the founding principles and this kind of lived experience. A very strong sense of social conscience, I think, is what drives us, and in support of transformation and really a people-centered approach to how we look at our work. So having said that, we are very interested in architecture in the city. In other words, architecture that is urbanistically literate, but we are more fundamentally interested in the architecture of the city and how do we bring change in small steps and big steps in what we do. So the image here is really the BRT corridor that links opportunities, employment opportunities in Pinetown with Bridge City and effectively KwaMashu. And it's a piece of city-scale infrastructure that's aimed at dismantling the apartheid city. So it's more than just the stations and dare I say the beautiful buildings that we designed. It's actually about the system. So that hopefully paints a picture in terms of our sort of beliefs and where we come from. And now I want to talk a little bit about our practice. So we are an interdisciplinary design practice that seamlessly weaves planning, urban design, architecture, and landscape architecture. And it was quite a deliberate strategy to grow the practice in this way, because if you want to be effective and bring about real change, then you got to build the city, you got to change the city. You can't just talk about it and write about it. And I think that bringing together these various disciplines enables much better design in terms of meeting a range of objectives, whether it's social, whether it's physical, and so on. So for us, our design process is quite an integrated process. We have at our heart kind of approach around people-centered placemaking. We have offices in Durban and Johannesburg. And I must say, what's really been interesting is the ability, you know, one of the positive things that came out of COVID is the ability to work across space using platforms such as Zoom. such as teams, such as BIM. And so we're quite connected, although there's a distance between the two practices. The way we operate, it's not a hierarchical kind of structure. We rather like to talk about it as an ecosystem. And we have, various individuals at a senior level that look after particular disciplines. But the idea is, as an ecosystem, we come together, so urban design, architecture, landscape architecture works on particular projects, or planning, urban design on certain projects. So I think, the practice is only as strong as its people. And I really would like to acknowledge the people that have supported us. Our core team is, Kamlan, who's the planning director, Tahira, who's the architectural director based in Johannesburg and runs our Johannesburg office, Amit, who's associate looking after some of the architectural projects, Avek, which is also an associate looking after planning projects, and Clive, who's an associate based in Joburg, who's a landscape architect who looks after our landscape projects. I think the image on the right shows our approach. It's very much around collaboration and using workshop design sessions for our work. This is our Durban studio, in fact, a few years ago, prior to COVID. But I wanted to show this image because it has Glanville on my right. Yeah. And it was very sad that we lost Glanville last year. He was ill for some time. And I really want, there's a special appreciation to Glanville, who was actually a member of KZNI, and the work that, and really the legacy it's left. One of the last projects that Glanville worked on was the Point Promenade, which is a significant addition to the public realm of Durban. So we really want to acknowledge Glanville for his contribution to the practice over the years. So our DNA, values and principles, as I mentioned, we have a strong social conscience, we're purpose-driven, we act beyond program. In other words, we try and deliver more. So we use each project, we deliver program, but other benefits, other interventions that it could unlock. We actively seek transformation. We're very deeply committed to bringing dignity, access, and equity. And I think going back, you only appreciate the need for access if you've been denied access. So the notion of a lived experience, I think, is quite important. People-centered placemaking. Our interventions are urbanistic. We do believe in the city, in an urban condition, from a social economic perspective. Interdisciplinary design as a continuum is quite important to us. And then lastly, understanding our responsibility, the fact that we work at a city scale, at a precinct scale, buildings can be after 15, 20 years recycled or demolished, but the city and its spatial structure is there to last. And so we do kind of bear quite significant responsibility in the way we think about our work and what we do. That for us is quite important. The way we do our work, sketching, writing, thinking, strategy, a lot of work is about strategy in urban design. Collective and collaborative, quite important. Design workshops, community engagements. The image at the bottom is one of the projects we're undertaking for the JDA in Orange Farm. So if you're doing sort of public architecture, it's important that the public are involved in that. Interdisciplinary design, our process coming from an urban design perspective, we obviously want to understand buildings in space. So we use SketchUp quite a lot. We use Revit, BIM, Lumion, and as well as GIS. We like to balance social, urban, technical, and the creative. The images on the right are sketches I did many, many years ago of the analysis of Mauritius and the shift in the tectonic plates. So a lot of doodling as part of our analysis, what we do. Some of the featured projects, I'll move on to that. I realize I'm talking a bit too much on projects on the background. So the first project I want to talk about is Bridge City New Urban Center. And this speaks directly to the narrative about restructuring the apartheid city. So Bridge City was a buffer strip effectively between KwaMashu and Phoenix, with Phoenix Industrial Park, further strengthening that buffer strip. And Brit City aims at bringing to this area, obviously, new linkages that tie the areas together, but to create a new urban center that provides for facilities at a higher level, higher order, that didn't exist in this community. And it's really interesting. We've made quite a lot of innovation in the way, as an example, the shopping center is considered. We have an active street edge boulevard. We have a train underneath, a station below, a taxi rank above. So it's a fully integrated intermodal facility, regional hospital, regional magistrates court. We're starting to see the first phases of residential occur within this area. So what was effectively a buffer strip between these communities could and is becoming a new urban center that starts to provide services and integrates community. Obviously, an urban setting, buildings that engage with the public on active basis to then boulevards and shared public spaces. The second project, also at a city level, is Kunubia New Town. This is very close to our hearts for eThekwini. And here we're building a completely new town. And this is just to give you a sense of scale. This is the Umhlanga area, Umhlanga Town Center, golf course, and Phoenix and all of this. Sorry, I think people could just mute their mics. All of this was agricultural land, but effectively a buffer strip that separated these communities. And so our intervention is really about reconnecting communities, establishing new linkages, developing a whole mixed-use town. So that's your town center, the kind of mixed-use core runs through it. Of course, housing projects was, I think, a huge achievement in terms of Kunubia is providing homes for subsidy homes within well-located land, close proximity to urban opportunity. This is some of the studies we've done on densities on the main sort of BRT corridor. And for the housing, I think quite interestingly, working within the subsidy range, we were able to almost flip things around where in the past, low-cost housing or subsidy housing was basically the formula was roads along contour, individual sites with buildings dropped in, where you optimize services, infrastructure. We flipped this around and said, we're going to optimize the needs of people. So the basic building block, in fact, is a courtyard and pedestrian circulation. And the unit is no longer individual units, but attached row housing to create a sense of edge and community. And this is the kind of one of the first phases that we've undertaken. So that was the pilot phase. This is the second phase that we're involved in. I think in total, we delivered about 2,300 homes. This is just a closer view of it. Of course, the courtyard spaces become communal spaces. And I think there's still a lot more investment that needs to go into these spaces. On the bottom right, this is a mixed-use social facility, school. Here you start to see that there's a consideration for our architecture integrates with spaces, with streets, the stepped unit responding to topography as opposed to doing mass earthworks, which you find in a lot of low-cost housing projects. The notion of the courtyard and its connectivity between spaces as the sort of basic building block. And we're really pleased with this project in the sense that this model is now being replicated in a range of projects throughout the city and elsewhere, the courtyard typology. The next project I want to talk about is also at a city scale, Mocha Smart City, which is in Mauritius. And here is the opportunity to create a completely new city again in an area that was previously under agriculture. So one of the challenges in Mauritius is a lot of the employment opportunities are concentrated in the core, which is Port Louis. A lot of people live outside. So there used to be this daily commute. And of course, the consequences of that in terms of environment, loss of time and so on, and cost. And so when we were brought into this project more than 10 years ago, after having thought about it and our initial design, we were going to a presentation with the client, and said, to myself, we've got to do something different. There's an opportunity to do more. And that morning, I was actually physically ill, knowing that I'm going to go to this client. And when I went there, I said to him, we're not going to do a normal development. We're actually going to build a city there because that's what Mauritius needs. This would have been the third formally planned city in Mauritius. And as you can see, there's the notion of a civic presence, the kind of order and structure of what is more urban, what is more of city rather than of suburbia or office park. And to my delight, the client has completely bought into this, and this concept has been further reinforced more recently in the last sort of 8 years or so. The government of Mauritius has adopted the smart city program, which is about designated smart cities that have to meet certain criteria. And so this project was then almost the natural start to a much larger notion of a smart city. Now, what was interesting in understanding or defining our approach to this was, again, a shift away from a conventional approach. And the main structuring spine through this project is a promenade. And here too, really pleased that the client has bought into this. So public transport, slow movement, walkability as being the major backbone to this development. So, which can be implemented incrementally to include a tram and so on. So that's just the first phase, which is Telfair, and some of the buildings within it. This is currently under implementation. That's the the promenade, the central walkable sort of space. These are the first buildings. We're currently involved in these two buildings, which are 4-story offices with retail on the ground floor. Osman Lang are involved in these two buildings. So the notion is to actually create this first piece of promenade with the edge, the buildings on the edge, to kind of build incrementally the start of the city. So this is a video that we've done at an earlier stage that hopefully illustrates the approach we've taken. So that's the existing spine, which was implemented some years ago in opening up the area, which is now being converted into the central promenade with human scale, 4-story buildings on either side. As this sort of generic, obviously the corners are, and the entrance into the promenade are expressed. That's the zone that's dedicated to people, not cars. And this is being detailed and implemented now by a local landscape architect. The edges, obviously, as you can see, are commercial edges, restaurants, to create that vibrancy that you need along some spaces. So hopefully that gives you an overview of that particular. So this is one of the buildings that we currently are building, these two, and that's the progress to date. A recent image that we received, in fact, just earlier this week. So that's one of our buildings. That's the other. So all of this has a super basement underneath it, very, very similar to the sort of Melrose Arch model, which is a huge investment, but shows a commitment by the client to move beyond just having parking dominate the area. So it's more about people spaces. So we're quite pleased with that. This is some of the projects that have already been implemented. This is a residential scheme undertaken by Architect Studio, Mauritius-based architects, and the promenade in front of it. Some of the spaces that are currently used, this is an outdoor cinema, so that's within that oval park that we had created. And I think a lot of these spaces are really about activation as well. It's not just physical design. I must say the client here has got several social programs, community outreach programs, and so on. Second project is Boplan, also a smart city in Mauritius, in the north of the island, a historic sugar factory in this area. And what was quite interesting when we first got there is that this place is just beautifully crafted, almost made by God. There's avenues of trees, there's a central water body, and there's a strong sense of history, older trees, and so on. So sort of the heart of it was really around the water body that we wanted to maintain and enhance as a feature that provides a sense of place. So in our earlier sort of workshops, we looked at how do you actually define this waterfront? How do you think about an active edge? And if you were to build a shopping center, how do you do something that is slightly different, where it exposes itself to the edge? It contributes to an urban environment. Parking is relegated to the rear of the environment. So this was the initial kind of sketch that we did, the continuation of a promenade again around the water body, the development of iconic buildings at the entrance as a gateway into the precinct, retention of landscaped portions that were there. And I must say it's really become quite a beautiful project in itself. Residential environments supporting it, which also then build into and provide threshold and density for development. So that's the original sketch, the kind of refined sketch, and what's actually been built to date, which is the shopping center and the promenade along the edge of the project. At a precinct scale now, one of the projects I think it's been one of our flagship projects was the Moses Mabhida Stadium precinct. We were involved in prior to the World Cup in 2006. So what was, when Durban was awarded one of the stadiums, what's shown in red is the outline of the site that was given out to competition. This was Kings Park Soccer Stadium. That's the rugby stadium. And as in any competition, you're allowed to break the rules. So an iconic building, an iconic stadium, we said, no, we're going to create an iconic precinct. And so what we did is we said, whilst that's the boundary, we're going to extend the boundary and include in that what is effectively was the railway shunting yards. There were trains parked in this prime property. So the wide boundary, we said to the city, you should acquire this and create a park that supports the stadium. The existing roads, let's relocate some of them or realign them, to create more space for public space in the area and look at linkages that go beyond the stadium. So this was our master plan that we had submitted, or similar. In fact, it's a revised, more refined version, but the principles are the same. Realignment of the street, reclaim the street as a mixed shared use street, dedicated pedestrian access next to the station, Imbizo Place as a place of meeting, a link back underneath the M4 that links to the beach promenade, so it's completely accessible in a safe way from the station, from the precinct station and beach. And then, of course, People's Park as a new addition to the recreation spaces of Durban. And within that, a square, the grand stair that leads up, it's almost on axis with the arch, you'll see in some of the images. But the point is, if we had just stuck to the brief and stayed within the boundaries, we would not have achieved what we have with the stadium. So this is the process that we have been through 2007, the build up to 2010, which was a massively successful event in Durban, 2015, and this is how it currently is. And you can see the linkages back to the promenade of Durban and so on. So that's the what we refer to as Heroes Walk, which is the approach from the city into the stadium. And the concept here was that there would be these focal lights, which we call beacons of light, and they would represent, as you progress towards the city, from 1994 to 2010. So that's the number of bands that we hear. So the kind of progression from democracy to take us to this point. The concept also was about to acknowledge heroes. So people who weren't acknowledged in the past and had achieved excellence in sport, that we would have their names engraved almost in these parts. Of course, you can imagine that was quite a process of who gets selected, and unfortunately, it didn't materialize. The base of the stadium, we wanted it to be like a colonnade with active edges so that it relates to the city. And I think this is one of the features that differentiates Durban Stadium from other stadiums, in that it engages with the city at large. The water feature is really a response to a historic stream that connected Umgeni River to the estuary of Durban. And it was also obviously provides a place of interest within that space. So we're quite proud of the way the city had responded to the opportunity of the stadium and did a lot more than just build a stadium. And it's quite a magnificent space. It's used for all sorts of purposes now. So that's your Heroes Walk as a kind of processional way up to the stadium. The water, again, a play on the concept of water, which is on axis with the arch. The stairs, the grand stair that leads you up to the stadium, which is a magnificent space, including the ramps for skateboarders who enjoy that space. Okay, so that's the stadium. At a precinct scale, the Point Waterfront, one of our earlier projects, and it's quite interesting that we were involved in designing a waterfront where there was effectively no water because the edges were all controlled by the harbor entrance. This was active port, which now has the cruise line terminal. And this was a beach, an active beach is currently used. So how do you create waterfront when there is no waterfront? So from a strategy perspective, Ushaka was the sort of catalyst to unlock this development. And it required an intake pier. So whereas all the other piers are stormwater piers that take water out of the city, this brings water in, fresh water, which is required to support marine life in the aquarium. And at that stage, it was the idea would have been to simply discharge that water back into the ocean. We said, what if you expose that water? And so effectively came up with this concept of a canal. So the water is then discharged at the harbor entrance here. And in that way, you create a lot of linear edge for waterfront. And I think it's quite an interesting way of turning what is waste into energy, so to speak. So these are the canal edges and the land parceling that occurs. We developed the guidelines, the architectural code for these buildings, which are residential. We would have preferred the edges to be more commercial. That was part of the vision, but unfortunately, a whole range of factors, including some of the urban blight as you move towards the point, has been a detractor of that. That's the canal which leads through to the entrance. Quite a beautiful space, actively used as well. Moving down to the next level of place, and I think again here was looking at the point as a place. So we had a second go at the point, and here we designed the promenade extension. This was always a controversial part of Durban, where you had clubs which kind of privatized the beach, and so after many years of engagement, the city reached an agreement to provide club facilities at the lower level. As well as parking. So it's a kind of basement, and on top of it is this beautiful promenade, which echoes the kind of shape of the coastline here. This is a project we undertook with Cox Architects in Australia. We were the local architects and designers. And this was very much the work of Glanville, who headed up this project. There you see the intake pier, the kind of approach of the promenade. This is the lifeguard tower, again, which just kind of picks up on this very organic form. So there's an upper level promenade and a lower level promenade, which is the deck. And Clive was involved very much from a landscape perspective in looking at how we recreate some of the dune planting along that edge. That's the lifeguard tower. Alexandra Park in Pietermaritzburg, also a project we undertook. This was for Nsinduzi in Pietermaritzburg, roughly around the time of the 2010 World Cup. And it was really creating a promenade and an entrance to the stadiums, Harigwala Stadium and a new stadium under construction. And that's really the link that we wanted to forge between an existing high school, the park, Alexandra Park, and the sports facilities. And we tried to create quite a dynamic form that echoes movement within it, and also provide for facilities, outdoor gyms, and so on. So these are lights that we designed specifically for this park. Obviously, having lighting in a space like this becomes quite quite important. And as you can see, it's used by a lot of people. We tried at one point to encourage the city to think of a skate park, but there's all sorts of risks associated with that. So we have this linear sort of red seat that moves through the edge of the park, defines the edge of the park. And at the one end, we've kind of morphed it down to meet the ground. And so as a kind of gesture to skateboarders to enjoy that space. And the city never picked it up. So we're very glad they didn't. Still in Pietermaritzburg, the City Hall precinct, we were involved in upgrading of the public realm on Chief Albert Lutuli. This is a space that the Comrades Marathon starts, quite an interesting space. One of the oldest city halls in South Africa. And so our approach was really to reimagine this as a space that could be sort of cordoned off to become more of a public space. So its finishes and so on supports that notion. We wanted to respond in a way that is of a contemporary nature. So we respect the history of the So we new lights that are quite contemporary. As part of this project, there was budget for an urban installation that we did. And we came up with the idea of, if you look at Pietermaritzburg as a city, their vision is a city of choice. We said, how do you achieve choice? Well, you got to have choice. You can be, there has to be movement. If you try to echo or indicate through this sculpture, you have to have strength, you have to have justice, you have to have a caring society, and you have to have freedom. These were actually people that worked in our office at that time that we sketched on. And we built these in Corten steel. So that's it in its context. The kind of street furniture, again, taking a very contemporary approach that can be seen in contrast to the historic fabric of the city. And that's shot at night. The next public project is the Westbury Park project. And this is really an interesting project for the JDA that we have undertaken many years ago, together with local studio from Johannesburg. So in trying to reconnect these communities that are dislocated from urban opportunity, the BRT system is quite an interesting way, quite a powerful way to do that. But at the same time, the implementation of it often unwittingly almost divides communities, unintentionally divides communities. So to overcome these barriers was a need for a bridge. So this is one community that fortunately had that problem. So in addition to providing for that safe bridge crossing, because of the level difference, we use the abutments to create an amphitheater and a park. And so again, this notion of creating more with less. And so it's an active park. Now, we also looked at new alternative ways for stormwater so bioswales. The graphics was done by the artwork on this particular end of the amphitheater was Lorenzo Nzimani. Safe place for children to cross. These videos are moments where I can have a sip of water. Here you can see the sort of play equipment and so on. And these are really, facilities that the community enjoy. And this is one space that's quite active on weekends and so on. So we're quite delighted with the way it did come out. Looking at building, I'm also watching my time, the next scale down. So the first building is, I want to talk about the Gold Urban Stations. And again, it's really about the strategy of reconnecting the city. So apart from the buildings, we're involved in the precincts as well, in designing precincts that are more mixed use, more vibrant, and respond to transport. So we went, in terms of the station itself, what we try to do is to create quite a contemporary station in a way that elevates public transport. So it's more than just about creating an interesting design. It's about lifting the status of public transport. The other aspect of it is, and I think this is just, again, one of our sort of a personal kind of objective is to bring architecture to everyone. So the same station is built in Umlazi and in Mashanga. So it is a way of democratizing architecture and bringing quality architecture to different spaces. The form of the station is about depicting movement, and it's kind of, I think, probably one of the better BRT stations in South Africa, if I can say so myself. Klipspruit Sports Stadium in Soweto, also a project for JDA. And I think the aerial shot actually introduces the plan almost by itself. So instead of just building a sports facility, we looked at extending that and including an outdoor courts, outdoor splash pad, looking at linkages through connecting to pedestrian spaces and so on. The building itself on a corner, so trying to echo that corner, emphasize that corner. And the structure of the building is really a steel structure, and a substructure which has polycarbonate sheeting, and of course the pattern sort of emphasizes the corner again. That brings in such beautiful light into the building. You can see it here in its position. So quite interestingly enough, we designed this building to be open and accessible and a sort of public forecourt. And at one of the community engagements, the community says, we want a fence, just like kind of, just sort of breaks all our backs in terms of what we've been trying to achieve. And when we asked why, he said, no, because we love this building so much, we want to protect it. So I thought that was quite a nice gesture, the significance of the building. With this polycarbonate facade, it acts as a light box. So it becomes quite almost a beacon. The concept itself was this light building which floats above what is effectively a continuous public space. That was really the concept for it. That's an internal view, although it's kind of scaled to a basketball court. Those can be moved and it can serve various functions. That's the splash pad. Second building, also for JDA in Soweto, is Noordkasuk Library. Again, placed within a context that is more than a building. So the public kind of square linkages across the existing facilities, the playground, and so on. This was an initial sketch I did at the very beginning of the project. It's interesting to see how it's translated into the building itself. Here, we used Rhine zinc as the main kind of cladding system. And the idea here was, to break from that mold of, when you look at communities like Soweto, KwaMashu, Phoenix, there's a standard typology for community buildings, for public buildings. It's the red brick and green roof. And we think that's an absolute disaster. Moving forward, we want to bring dignity, pride in public buildings. And so they should do more. Here, the kind of play was really, if you can use Rhine zinc in Sandton, why not in Noordkasuk? So that's the building, it kind of hovers over spaces. This is the building we recently completed in SAIA. It's the entrance building. And I think here, this is more really just to describe something that I think is quite beautiful architecturally. It's the offset of a very linear building that's cantilevered with a very playful, organic offshot, a curved wall. Yes, we did that, which houses all of the services underneath it. And it has a green embankment across it. So we're very pleased with the way this has come out. Again, we also use courtyard steel, and almost the building is a large material board for the homes that are going to be built within the estate. This is a very personal project. This is the shed at Princess Grant. And the same kind of thought process of a sort of entry court. You kind of squeeze between a threshold point between the garage and the main building, which brings you into an enclosed courtyard, defined by a new wall and a row of plants, a row of trees. And this courtyard on the other end is bookended by a second bedroom. And the forest then becoming the third sort of courtyard, which opens up. So that's the arrival courtyard. That's the central courtyard. Here we've used a steel portal. Again, we work a lot with steel. It's quite crisp. And we were given quite a hard time by the design review panel because it breaks the code, so to speak. So it is a contemporary interpretation of their sort of pseudo colonial style architecture. You see the structures, an internal view, the view out into this magical forest that's now emerged, which I really enjoy. And here you can see the kind of context with the bush. So many homes have orientated themselves away from the bush, but we wanted to engage with the bush. So that becomes quite an interesting approach to wake up with nature. So I've recently discovered that all the timber and steel and posts has just become this massive jungle gym for this family of this troop of monkeys that visit in the mornings. That's the engagement with the forest. I think working with a portal structure allows you to engage with that space. It's quite a wonderful feeling to not be disrupted by trusses. So kind of contemporary interpretation of the veranda. Again, how to engage us with the green space, the central courtyard. And that's the view across the golf course. So those are the projects that I thought would be of interest for the discussion this morning. So our design process and approach, I thought we'll use one of the projects we're currently doing in Orange Farm for the JVA. It's an art and technology center. And within this community, there are several artists that are interested. So the facility is meant to promote arts, provide technologies in the making of art, so dance studios and so on. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're designing a public building, the public should be involved. So there's a series of workshops to define the program, to understand what's required. And then our approach is really that form is a response to program. So the structure of the building, the shape of the building responds to that. We want a public building that makes a civic gesture. So the positioning of the building relates to the creation of a public forecourt, which is quite important. Sustainability is a primary driver. We want this building to be completely green building off the grid. So our roofs are orientated north, which helps us for solar panels. The south elevation on the vertical is clear glazing, which brings south light into artist studios, which is the most consistent light, and so on. The courtyard as a collaborative and integrative space, you would have got by now that we love courtyards. We feel they're quite important with artists to engage in that space, but also for performance in that space. Existing trading along the street edge we want to retain, but give dignity to how it functions. This is some of the precedent that we've used, the programming of how various components come together around the courtyard. Quite important for us in creating the civic gesture is the screen, which acts almost as the curtain to the theatre. And once it opens, and once you pass through that threshold, you have the vibrancy of all these arts within it. I wouldn't go through the plans itself. That's just a cross-section, elevations. And importantly, in all our designs, there's a landscape component to it. So how we understand, the central courtyard, the concepts for it, the sculpture garden as a space for artists to display their work. This was the landscape concept and some images. So as I mentioned, the screen is quite an important device that gives the building identity. These boxes are dance studios, almost as windows that punch out, that start to describe what the building's functions are in a way. It gives you a glimpse of it. And we're spending quite a lot of time to try and understand what the screen could be made of. We're thinking of it to be made of a polymer type of material that's impregnated with a brass or copper type of color. And its form and the way it's made, is meant to signify the making of something. So it's going to be quite refined when we get there. It's an internal view, it's a view of the side. And I think really this what I wanted to illustrate with this project is the kind of process that we go through of engagement, understanding needs, and how you apply it, and how urban design, landscape architecture influences our architecture. So where to from here? Thoughts on the future city. So I started by talking about this, my world in 10 minutes. And imagine if we were to design a 10-minute city for the future, using the best of the technology that we have now, the current movement system, the technology that exists. Sorry, I'm running out of words, as you can see. So we flip this around and say the structure of the city. So this would be a 10-minute walk. That would be a 5-minute walk. The structure of the city is public space. So the main components are these massive play lots, green linkages that take you through. The central spine is a promenade, and in that promenade is a transit spine. So obviously the station becomes the focal point, and around that you build density and you build complexity. Access to parks, green spaces, and then framing this, providing a containment almost for that density is a productive green space where you can have urban agriculture and so on. Of course, we do have to connect it with roads. So unfortunately, we will have a few roads, but their treatment will be quite different. So, I think if we start to almost go back to first principles of walkability and how we design in the future, and almost take back the making of cities from engineers to urban designers and architects. I think there is hope for us to create a better world. So what could this look like? Imagine the basis of it being public transport driven. So high-speed rail below, monorail at the top, promenade at the street level, cars banished to the periphery. Just another view, BRT integrated in that. Imagine if we prioritize public placemaking, for coffee, for play, for romance, for movement, for business, for social, a completely different form of city. The residential environment was shaped by public spaces, non-motorized lanes, civic facilities that are included in the makeup of that and don't stand alone in isolation. Changing the way we work. We understand post-COVID that you need to rethink the type of boardroom. Is it an indoor boardroom or an outdoor boardroom? I think the future city and the successful businesses are going to be based on how you retain high caliber, skilled staff that are able to engage in the fourth industrial revolution. So their requirements are quite different from traditional office worker who drives to work and so on. It's a much more of a creative type of setup. So we need to rethink how we design workspaces, productive spaces. How do you embed within close to residential communities, urban agriculture to secure food security? So having said all of that, I think I've now completely run out of words. So hopefully, I think through this discussion this morning and presentation, I've described, where we come from as a practice, our work and how those principles are carried through, and our thoughts on where we should be going if we want to make a more sustainable city in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. You may stop sharing because
Trying to figure out how to do that. Have I stopped sharing?
see.
Yes, I've stopped the sharing, Nathan.
Okay, great. I was wondering what's happening there. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Nathan, for that. Congratulations for a beautiful journey in the profession and what you've achieved and all of that. That's absolutely lovely to see. Nathan, I just want to ask one question, which relates to the profession in the built environment profession in South Africa is predominantly white. And you're in a space where you're influential, JDA, eThekwini, Mauritius, etc. How do you how do you attribute your success in those fields as a non-white person, as a Black person who's able to absolutely penetrate and have a voice in those spaces?
Very interesting question.
Yeah,
And
maybe
relevant
unfair.
one.
So,
Geez, the first question is always it's quite a tough one. But you see, I think it's firstly, I have to say that the work we do and the need right now and the reason for practices that kind of look the way we are, the way we look, is because of a lived experience and the need to understand why, I mentioned earlier in the presentation, why access is so important. If you've been denied access, you know what that means, what it feels like. So I think, the nature of practices obviously needs to reflect the people that we're designing for. I think that's fundamental. But in terms of an individual and the way I've approached my work, is that I let my work speak for itself, beyond any sort of classification of who I am as a person. And I think it probably comes from more of a sort of Black consciousness approach, where one has to be confident about what you do, let your work speak for you. And in a sense, I've never kind of said I'm inferior. I don't want to sound like really horrible now, but I think to promote Black excellence and pride and so on is important, and that you are equal, if not better. That's been my approach. And when I first started working, I would attend a meeting and no one would talk to me, no one would shake my hand. It didn't affect me because I knew I was better than that in terms of what I stood for and what I could do. So I think that's how I've kind of overcome that and so on.
yeah, lovely. So it's a mixture of just doing what you know is best in terms of just excelling in what you do, and just your experience essentially. Yeah. No, thanks for that. I know that there was a question posed to an Indian a steel magnate, Lakshmi Mitchell, that he had been buying companies in the UK. How does he feel that he's taking over a place that used to colonize his own country, comes from India? And he says, but you know what? I don't actually see the world like that. And so there's a place where your background defines you, and then there's a place where you get to a situation or a level where that does not even matter anymore. So thanks for that, Nathan. The one key thing, Nathan, for me, I know that you've been involved with the Port Marina, and you chose not to share it, and I'm very, very keen on that. And obviously, as architects, we sign non-disclosure agreements and all that with our clients and all of that, and it's important to be professional in those cases. I just wanted to just run us through what your involvement is on the Port Marina. And the reason I'm throwing the question to you, Nathan, is we're just having currently, as the Institute, we are interested in what's happening in the port in terms of the terminal building that's approved to be demolished by AMAFA. Your project may or may not actually be affected by that. But it is very pertinent for us as architects, the community of architects, to know whether your project would affect that, or it does not, or how much you are willing to share, since it was not part of the process that you shared, the marina in the Durban port.
So, Skula, what's up with you? All these difficult questions on a Friday morning.
Sorry?
But yeah, I think it's important that I do make some comments on it.
Yes, yes.
So our involvement was really in support of city architects in creating a vision for how the waterfront could be developed. And if you think about it, I mean, this is really a real waterfront. It exists, you know, the yacht mall and so on. And it sits in an amazing part of the city where it's within walking distance from the CBD. And so the inherent opportunity, I think, has never been explored fully in the past. So it was great to work with the young team at City Architects in reimagining the space. So we initially came up with a concept, and which is the one that's been put out into the world. And it's quite a bold.
I think it was shared on the Mercury, a few Fridays ago,
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yes, yes.
And then we were subsequently appointed by Catalytic Projects by the city to revisit the concept and engage with the key stakeholders who are obviously Transnet, the landowners. Itala owns a portion of it, and of course, importantly, the city departments such as environment and so on. And that has then been given more of a refinement that reflects a whole range of wider concerns. And in fact, and which has resulted in an adaptation of that original concept. The principles and approach is pretty much the same about creating a waterfront that makes a presence and has an urban African type of approach to the buildings and spaces. But the fundamentals have changed, and I believe have improved in some respects. But it's subject to a process that still has to undergo feasibility, further engagement between, you know, quite important stakeholders, you know, Transnet, Portnet, the city itself. And so I think it's premature to, because that will change probably again. So it's premature to present that. I thought, you know, it's wiser not to. But on the second part of your question, and I'm sure that everyone is you know, keen to understand the background to Ocean Liner Terminal. So that forms part of the port's master plan, not the city's master plan. And I think there's a distinction there that needs to be made. That the port, one has to acknowledge that the Durban Container Port is the heart of Durban. It's one of the most important economic activities, and it provides employment for many people in Durban and the spin-off of just the container movement within the area. So it's reached a point where that facility needs to expand. And so the port have a master plan, which is a long-term plan of how to expand and improve the functioning of the port, you know, because we all know of the delays and so on. So, you know, that's a separate initiative that's been driven by the port around improving efficiencies in the port. And sadly, that area is being redeveloped as part of the broader port master plan.
Okay, thanks, Nathan. Colleagues, the floor is open for questions and comments. Before I do take the question though, Nathan, there's one interesting thing. I don't know if you are aware of it. The Kings Park Soccer Stadium was not a north-south orientation. It was east-west. I've watched so many games where the goalkeepers can't actually see the ball. It's either a cup tournament early in the morning, then there's the you know, and then or the a league game in the afternoon. It does not work. Do you know why the soccer stadium was planned like that before you demolish it for the People's Park in Mosambida, the soccer stadium? It was an east-west orientation, which doesn't quite work.
This was probably driven more, the decision around it was driven more by the scale of the facility that was required. And here we worked with, or the sort of lead architects were GMP from Germany.
So sorry, Nathan, I'm talking about the one that was demolished, the one before.
Oh no, sorry.
The one is perfect. I don't know if you know the history behind it. So it's not a question based on what
What's been
work.
booked? Okay.
It's just based on whether you know the background of it.
No, I don't remember that.
Yeah, because okay. All right.
So
It's got
I'll
probably
let
something
that
to do
one.
with
Thanks,
access and prevailing winds and weather.
Yeah, it absolutely didn't work for soccer.
So when you
at all.
design, you actually have to think about the elements as well.
Yeah, no, it didn't work for soccer at all, though.
Yeah, as well as access. But of course,
Yeah.
it doesn't work for the poor old goalkeeper. He's got to wear sunglasses.
Have you watched the soccer match there?
Yeah.
Is it?
I mean, we have sort of very bright afternoons, and it's a bit hellish, poor bugger. But anyway, supply him with goggles, supply him with bloody sunglasses. The cricketers do, so why can't the footballers do it as well?
Mm. Okay, Adima?
Otherwise, grow some big trees at the other end. Okay.
Yeah. Adima?
So thanks, Nathan, for your presentation. I suppose while we were listening, Miguel and I were in Portugal, in Lisbon, in January, and it's kind of hard to deny the necessity and value that a city brings when it's so considered to human movement. I mean, I just asked Miguel to double check again now, and so the comparative is Lisbon, like Durban, has a very similar population to Durban, but is just under 100 square kilometers in its radius, in its area, whereas Durban's looking at, I think, just under 2,300 kilometers. And so when you think about the urban scale and the necessity for kind of attempting to reconnect people after the evident trauma of something like apartheid and kind of perpetuated apartheid colonialism, these micro cities are almost the only way to kind of reinstate that. So I think that's really interesting. But I suppose I wanted to try and prod you and provoke you to talk a little bit more about the Marina project, because I think, and not in detail, but I think just your perspective around it, because it's quite an interesting thing, right? In the way in which we've, I suppose, for a very long time, and even with the ocean terminal, and Skura, you know, I have contesting views around the ocean terminal building and the demolition. But I think I'm interested in understanding what your perspective is on the necessity, because that's evident in your practices philosophy, but the necessity on having a multidisciplinary or almost transdisciplinary discussion, and the relationship and role that the public play in creating those spaces. Because what we've seen is kind of an attempt from architecture as a profession, as a discipline, to engage in this realm, but still without a didactic nature. We render our city still in the way in which it is, which is dying, you know. Whereas urban design, I think, and your approach has an intention of reconnecting people and place and rejuvenating in a real way the city. And so maybe just talking through the way in which you are seeing the process with the Marina project, how you see that reinstating and reconnecting the city, especially as someone who grew up in the inner city. My mother's family is from Soldiers Way, so that area is really close to my heart as well.
Carlisle Street is right in the middle, yeah.
Yeah. So just talking about the impact of that and reestablishing our city, because what we're finding is that development is happening elsewhere and just perpetuating the death of the city. And I think that your philosophy is so important. And so I want to get you to talk a bit more about that, if you don't mind. Sorry for the long-winded question, but Shakira, thanks, Nathan. Really lovely presentation.
Thanks, Adima. A very interesting question as well, and subject we need to talk about, and how you interpret a waterfront within a more democratic setting that's accessible. I think that's one of the founding principles, and we've seen evidence of this. You know, the V&A waterfront, as an example, is quite, although it makes a linkage, physical linkage back to the CBD as a space. It's not completely integrated, or you're not encouraged to be in that space. There's an awkwardness for people of color in that space. So when we think about the Durban city, so that's the Durban waterfront here at the Yacht Mall. That's one of the primary drivers, is how do we create a better connected waterfront that enables access for all? And one of the challenges is that it is, and I think the challenge that has existed for many years is it's cut off from the city. The water edge is cut off from the city by the railway line that links the port to the railway line in the south. And so that presents a barrier. And I think it's been one of the main sort of deterrents to integration and in fact, encouraging development along that water's edge. So the first priority is to get rid of that. And so one of the strategies we have is to, and obviously subject to further investigation and so on, is to take the railway and put it below ground. And so now you create a single plane across the city. Of course, that means reconsidering how Victoria Embankment is designed or redesigned to enable safer connections across. So I think that's the first fundamental, an important fundamental. Why is it important to develop the waterfront? As you say, as quite correctly say, I mean, you know, we want to bring investment back to the city. What we find is that the most integrated spaces, you can look at any South African city, the most integrated spaces socially, economically, are the CBDs in terms of the population makeup. So Durban CBD and the embankment and the buildings around it probably is some of the most affordable waterfront properties, if you think about it, you know, as compared to Cape Town, as an example. So access to a waterfront environment, not just physical walking access, and it's more than that, it's about the ability to own apartments within a real waterfront, is really a magical opportunity that Durban has, which will set it apart. So the waterfront is a project to reinvigorate the CBD, to make it more accessible, to bring investment, I think is absolutely vital. And that's why the city is now placing a lot of emphasis on it as a kind of real waterfront. So hopefully I've answered your question, Fatima.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. Yeah, it's just, for me, it's really fascinating. Sorry to chime in against Gura, but I think it's a really necessary part of the conversation to have in terms of redressing, not just redressing the reality that our spatial trauma is one that is also intrinsically tied to the heritage and our perceptions of conservation. And so for me, that's a really functional way of addressing it and talking to the value that it brings back in terms of public connection. And that's what I really wanted to engage with. So yeah, Shak, thanks, Nathan. Thanks, Gura.
Thank you guys. Nathan, now I use the promenade a lot, and the extension of the promenade has got fire points. Would you explain that to me? Our analysis when we were doing the bridging station was that it's most likely that fire comes from the trains themselves and nowhere else in the platforms or the ablutions or anything like that.
Yeah.
What is the risk in your understanding to try and provide fire extinguishers and all that there? And what does it mean? I mean, to the rest of the promenade, if you go up towards Blue Lagoon, if we have to reconsider that?
Well, the reason for that, and I think when we look at the promenade now, we see it as a single piece of infrastructure, as a promenade. But the actual design of that space includes a whole lot of buildings along it that provide the edge. And I don't know if you recall, there was an image circulated many, many years ago by the developers that had these hotels and towers. So it's more than just the promenade that's being planned. And I think those services have been installed in mind, you know, of something greater
for the future. Yeah.
Yeah. And unfortunately, you know, there have been, I think there were some projects that a hotel that was meant to happen shortly after the promenade, and it sort of fell away. Yeah. So that's the reason.
Okay. Any more questions, please?
Skura, yes, I do, if I may. Can I butt in?
I can.
Thanks,
Yes.
Skura. First of all, Nathan, thank you very much for a very impressive presentation and a wonderful body of work. Well done. Questions, though. Most of your presentation was based on graphic presentations, flybys, walkthroughs, Do you regularly revisit your projects and assess the good and the not so good? And do you feed that back into your system? And the one thing that occurs to me is that you have large open areas, large courtyard areas, and seemingly very little protection from our weather. And we do have some serious weather along the coast of Natal, that's for sure. And just the general, and maybe any comments about the general conflict between access, open access, and individual and group security. Thanks, Nathan. So.
Thanks, Ken. Really good questions. Yeah, certainly I've obviously put together a presentation in a way that can illustrate the body of work in a very succinct and easy manner. There's a whole lot of other kind of presentation tools and to arrive at that position. Yes, we do revisit our projects and do assess them from time to time. And I take your point around wind and excessiveness of spaces. To give you an example, the stadium has, on its peak, it has a requirement for a certain extent of space, which we've kind of modeled and studied and looked at stadiums in Germany and so on. So unfortunately, it requires that kind of space for the peak event that you have to design for. And so our approach has always been to try and find other uses that, of course, it's never going to be a significant attraction that fills up that space. But by adding like the restaurants, the kids' play area, there used to be a water feature, interactive water feature, and so on, was one of the attempts to try and rescale those spaces to work in the non-peak. The ratio between buildings and courtyards we examine very carefully in the design process, especially on the community buildings. So those courtyards are scaled so that the edges define them. Of course, you're going to get climatic conditions that would, events, and we're seeing a lot more of those. But certainly we do revisit our projects, and we do consider those spaces. But unfortunately, sometimes you do have to design for the peak. The conflict of access, I think, yeah, it's a very relevant one. The option of looking at how, I think it does relate to urban design. And if you design buildings to look onto spaces where there's natural surveillance, you create natural safety. But from a technological perspective, I think if you retreat, it's more of a risk. So building on the edge and using the building and the way you design the building in terms of access, I think is a way of, rather than having, if your building becomes a fence, to put it in a simple way. But it remains a challenge. And I think the more we build cities that are dispersed and of a lower intensity, divorced from the public realm, the greater the challenge is going to be. And we're going to revert to options of physical fences and barriers, which, if anything, makes it more unsafe. Ken, I hope I've addressed your question. Where does she want to come in?
Happy, Ken?
Thanks. Yeah, many other questions, though, but carry on. Let other people have a go.
Let's go with Ivor.
Morning, Nathan, and well done. Thanks. Very, very informative presentation. I just want to check with you, when on the Mozambique Stadium, did the integration of urban design and architecture, particularly with the competition as it was structured at the time, how much influence and how much integration did your urban design play together with the architects, and how you integrated that and influenced the urban environment through the architectural design? That's my first part of my question.
You want me to answer that first?
Yes, please. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Okay. All right. A very, very interesting question, because I think there's some lessons in this that one can get out of it. And the first thing is about the power relations in a team and the makeup of the team. So in the way I kind of positioned myself in the team was a lead member. So I think the organization of a team is critical. As you know, so urban design by being represented at the table at the most senior level is one of the reasons why we achieved what we achieved. So I think there's a lesson in that, in how you structure teams and the importance of urban design. The actual design influence happened through the workshops, and all of that was happened in Germany, where the architects obviously were concerned about the stadium. Our responsibility was everything outside of the line of the actual stadium. And I guess it's just having a strong voice, and I think urban design also requires what's the word, strength or conviction, to the cause. And that's how we managed to grow this project. That's how we managed to look at the base of the stadium as being an interactive base, a people's park and the approach and all of those things. The other lesson is that, throughout the process, whenever there's a budget, a challenge on the budget, the first thing that they look for to take out is landscape, architecture, public spaces. And I think it's just being firm around those issues. And that's, I think, how we kind of pulled it off. It's just having a seat at the table at the most senior level and having the conviction and will to just remain steadfast in seeing this project through.
Thanks, Nathan. I think that it's very evident that there's a very close relationship between the urban design and the architecture, the iconic nature of it, the alignment of the arch, the entire urban structure makes it important a contribution to a holistic piece of architecture. My other question relates to the other elephant in the room, is talking about the ocean terminal, the marina proposals, etc. And I think the issue I have issue with in regard to is the process by which the city and Transnet are engaging with the city, and the interface. The city, the port and the city are integrated organization which needs to actually work. And you've obviously touched on the main element which causes separation, physical separation, is the railway line. Obviously, any development towards the point and along the interface with the city is going to contribute to that disruption. And it's how the public and the port's plan and the city plan interface holistically, not from the point right the way along to Wilson's Wharf, say, where the interface with the residential and the commercial nature of the city is so important that it can't be left to one organization to dictate to the other. It's got to be a integrated process, and I'm interested to know how you feel we can actually enhance that process rather than fight a process, but to actually ensure that the process is one which deals with the holistic city environment. It's obviously all the drivers which make it a people-orientated space, as well as obviously economically viable on a national and local basis. So yeah, it's the process I'm interested in hearing how you feel that can be enhanced.
Thanks, Ivor. Scooter did warn me in the morning. There's going to be a lot of questions around this. Thanks, Scooter, for the heads up. Yeah, look, I think there is a process that the city are involved in now, which relates to the kind of city land holdings and the precinct. But I do know that the city and city architects and catalytic projects and so on are very keen on understanding how the Port Master Plan integrates with the rest of the city, the corridors that you're talking about. So that's not completely a done deal, I think. There's further engagement that catalytic projects are having on those, the kind of spatial arrangement of that. But I guess the question you're asking is more, how does the Institute get involved in the process? And I think it's just making a representation through the city to be a voice in all of this. for your, to be part of the sort of engagement process. Under normal, or it is a kind of national priority project, and I think there might be a difference in the way the engagement process happens. It might be at a more sort of strategic level, at a more city leadership, Transnet leadership level, but I don't see it as an issue, or I don't see it doing any harm by engaging directly with the city and finding out how does the Institute of Architects get involved or offer opinion, comment, and participate in the process.
I think if I can just add, what I want to emphasize is that the engagement of the Institute in this topic is not directly about saving a sentimental thing. It's about actually how we can use assets to be repurposed, or how can they be integrated into a holistic plan. And from what I know of it, is the problem is that the port plan and the city plan, I have not seen any form of integration between the two. And that's where I'm trying to find out, how can we actually engage in that process to not necessarily influence it, but to be able to engage and add positively to it, rather than in fact be seen as a negative force. Let's rather be seen as a positive force in how we can deal with that.
Sure, I understand. And as I said, I think that the Catalytic Projects Unit and City Architects are engaging in that process of trying to come up with an integrated plan that looks at the port master plan and the surrounding precincts. I know they're very interested in that as well.
Good.
Of course,
thanks,
how it
Nathan.
comes back to the waterfront, that video.
Exactly, yeah. Thank you, Nathan.
Thanks, Ivan.
Thanks, Ivan. Thanks, Nathan. Nathan, housing. We look at Konubia. What is that taught you as a designer in terms of affordability versus design? I think there's a great effort to make public spaces and to make the areas livable. But then we're informed by what is affordable in terms of the size of the unit. I mean, RDP house, maybe 150,000 rents at the moment. I haven't done what since before COVID, so I don't know what the price is now. But those numbers play in your mind as an architect. And in whatever you design, you have to think about feasibility. There's how the environment works, there's how the building looks like, but there's also feasibility in terms of, for this particular bracket that I'm accommodating housing for, what does that work? How does it work? How does that work out, so to speak? So just want to find out, in doing Konubia and the housing project there, how did you learn? What did you learn as an architect in terms of affordability versus how the environment works, and how do we balance that? Because there's always a challenge in balancing how the environment is like versus what the city can spend on it. Because that's a definite thing. The city can spend this much on a unit, and the architect has got this and this idea, and we always have to meet each other halfway in terms of what is feasible, in terms of what is applicable, etc.
Yeah, very, very good, very pertinent question. Well, I think one of the challenges we have in the country as a whole, in fact, in many cities, is institutionally how we structure. So you'll find that housing is a sector, parks is a sector, community buildings or social infrastructure is a sector, schools and so on. And I think when you're designing for housing, the approach we should be taking is not looking at designing the house, designing the site by a different person, designing the road, getting social facilities when and they never come. I think housing, because of its integrative nature and the fact that you have to design a complete settlement, needs a rethinking of institutionally how we structure it. on a project by project basis, you almost need, or region by region basis, a kind of new entity that because there is budget. It's just that it's channeled in a very isolated way. So imagine if we were to create an institution around Kunubia that brings all of the social facilities funding into that for parks and recreation, for roads and so on. Then we can start designing an integrated settlement. So I don't believe we've got that formula right in Kunubia. We've worked within the subsidy. I think the fact that the basis of design is around public spaces is a good start. We created a structure, but there still needs to be a lot more investment in social infrastructure, in landscape, and so on. So the lesson for me, I think, is the design is the easy part. We've all done it. The design is the easy part. It's the financial arrangements, it's the institutional arrangements that we need to start investigating that delivers more integrated housing. As a developer would do, let's say in a project, you would have a budget that he knows part of it has to go for the buildings, part of it has to go for the external spaces, etc., etc. The landscaping, for it to work as a viable project, to sell that project, you've got to invest in everything else, not just the buildings. You happy with that, Skura? I think you've used up all your questions, Skura. You need to pass it on.
Sorry, I'm muted. No, I've got a few, but I'll let them go, Nathan, because you actually the practice breakfast is about celebrating a practice and learning from them. That's what it's about. It's not a crit. It's not a criticism.
No, sure.
It is about understanding. It is about learning. It is about finding the philosophy which you've taken us through that. And our hope that I've led in terms of the questions and the comments that I've done myself, so that people can may if they had any questions about Kunubia, about the port, about anything else, anybody can then come in.
Yeah.
To
there's no criticism. It's correct.
No, absolutely, Nathan.
But just one more thought. One more thought on Kunubia to answer another aspect of your question earlier. I think one of the successes is that if you think about the normal housing process in a typical RDP process, there would be a town planner doing a layout. There would be the civil engineer designing the roads. There would be a typical unit that someone did 15 years ago, and they would give you that floor plan. And the developer or the contractor will then basically, the civil guy will do the roads, which will determine the platforms. And usually the roads wanting a particular grade, they'll just flatten everything. And then the contractor will take the house and he will plonk it on, and the surveyor will come in and create sites. So what we managed to do is flip that around and work very closely with the engineers. So the integration of the design, I think, was also one of the success factors. So we did the architecture, the urban design layout, and we've sat with the engineer and shaped it to follow contour and made sure buildings are positioned at the street and so on. So I think apart from the funding model that I spoke about, I think the need for integrated design across the disciplines involved in housing is also critical.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Nathan. I think colleagues, that's our morning. Thank you everyone for your contribution. Thank you so much, Nathan. I think I've learned a lot, and now your approach and how things come about. There's a gentleman who's now based in the States from Pretoria. He's looking for planners like yourselves, Elon Musk. I don't know if you've thought of approaching him. He's working with ACOM at the moment.
Really?
ACOM. Yes. So do consider that. I think he would love your portfolio. I don't know him. I have not spoken to him, but it's something for you to think about.
Thanks, Kura. Really appreciate that.
Okay, lovely. Thank you so much, guys, for joining in. See you again in a few weeks' time.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.